Welcome back to Spirit Man Studios. Now, with the upcoming War for the Planet of the Apes coming out this Friday, I figure we take a look at the first two installments of this prequel reboot trilogy. Now, why do I call it a prequel reboot? Well, these take place during the events before the Planet of the Apes films, but it also reboots the brand so that it tells a new story, but yet is also connected to the original source. And I figure what better time than any to talk about Rise of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Done for the Planet of the Apes. So let's begin with the first one. Released back in 2011, Rise of the Planet of the Apes was set to be the first of a prequel trilogy that was to highlight what happened before the events where Charlton Heston showed up on the original Planet of the Apes from 1968. And I feel that back in 2011, I figure Rise of the Planet of the Apes was actually kind of good. So what's the story about? Well, James Franco plays a researcher trying to develop a cure for Alzheimer's. And during this, he has a friendship with an ape named Caesar, played by Andy Serkis, the master of motion capture, as everyone likes to say. And it's over this period of time that he grows a bond with this ape. But little does he know that sometimes you have to let your apes go, and he finds out that it is illegal to have an ape in your possession that you are working with. Thus, he had to go put Caesar inside of a cage, where he's being taken care of by none other than Tom Felton. Oh, you don't know who Tom Felton is? Oh, well, Tom Felton is Draco Malfoy. Yeah, I figured that with Tom Felton at this point. He's been typecast a lot as the evil douchebag. I mean, seriously. First we had Draco Malfoy, now we have this character, and now he's on The Flash. And granted, he's not much of a dick character anymore on the show, but I just feel that he's going to end up being typecasted a lot in the rest of his career as being the evil person, as being a jerk. It's kind of odd to me that way. It is here in this enclosure that Caesar grows and develops more into a more conscientious, intellectual person. You know, a person that has a more of a human cognitivity, and he rises up against the human slave, the human slavers, the people that enslave the apes to make them, their test subjects. And, it's just telling about how the first initial movement of these apes granted them the Planet of the Apes. Now, as far as, getting to where, the first Planet of the Apes goes, it doesn't fully get there. As I mentioned before, it's a trilogy, meaning that it has to go through this whole arc and tell this huge story about how everything came to be by the time Charlton Heston goes home. That goes to the Planet of the Apes. That's just it. And Rise of the Planet of the Apes definitely shows the beginning portions of what is to come for the Planet of the Apes franchise. I feel that with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, it has two big strengths in this movie. One is the storytelling aspect. We spend a lot of time with Caesar and James Franco in the film that allows us to get a sort of connection between the two characters and how Caesar really feels about leaving his friend behind. Because for the longest time in his early life, all he's known is James Franco's character. And when he betrays him, that is all the more personal for him to actually go against the human race. And, and by the time this film ended, I was like, I kind of want to see more of that. I kind of want to see more for what the Planet of the Apes is to come. What happens to James Franco? What happens to all these people? And we did get a sequel to this, but I don't know if it fully answers those. And the other big part is the motion capture. Now, I know a lot of people are really hesitant towards the idea of CGI and using them for making characters, but I feel like over time in the Planet of the Apes series, they've actually improved that a lot. Like, a lot. And you can clearly see it. Like, CGI has been used for the last 20 years and has gotten progressively better. Like, when you compare films like Polar Express to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, there's a real big technological jump. And even with the recent Rogue One using all of its CGI, making it look like more and more like a real life thing, we've come pretty far for computer generated effects. And it's no different than having Caesar and a bunch of the other apes in this film being played by real actors in suits that make them look like complete idiots, but yet when they do all the digital stuff, it makes them look like real apes. And that's the most impressive thing about this film. Now, as for flaws, there's a couple editing errors I found, but other than that, I do think that this is a pretty solid film, and it is regarded as one of the best reboots of all time, especially from James Rolfe, or the Angry Video Game Nerd. And I'll have his review of this film and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes in the description below. He really likes both of them, really. And for me, Rise of the Planet of the Apes gets an A-. Next up is Dawn for the Planet of the Apes. This story follows the events of the 2011 film Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and this is a film that was made 3 years later in the year 2014. A rarity in blockbuster films is that you can have time between movies to tell a story. And with, franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Comics universe making their own films every single year, it's kind of a rarity nowadays that we get blockbuster films that are made not exactly consecutively every year. And that's what I hugely praise about the blockbusters for the Planet of the Apes films, is that they take a couple years to make, in which, you have some breathing room between films. And it gives you more time to go back and reminisce about the other films in the series and actually discuss what you really liked about the films, and then you can watch the new one in a couple years, which is so great to me. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes follows the society after Rise of the Planet of the Apes. The simian flu that was released in the Rise of the Planet of the Apes is now widespread, and the human population is dwindling, so much so that the human society itself, kind of just collapses. And it features a human colony trying to be compatible with the ape society led by Caesar, and they're trying to coexist and co-inhabit the society that they are now trying to survive in. And there's also at the same time a contingency group that is against Caesar inside of the ape community. And it's such an interesting movie because it takes after the Julius Caesar storyline from, Shakespeare. Now granted, it's not a purely, Caesar's dead throughout the film. They kind of give this sense of false killing off at towards the middle of the movie. They sort of kind of kill him off, I guess. But then at the end, they have this nice fight scene between, the evil ape and Caesar, and it kind of, diminishes that. And by the end of the film, there's so much sabotage and damage towards the human colony that the humans now decide that they want to go to war. Hence, the last movie in this trilogy will be War for the Planet of the Apes. As a film, it is a pretty solid follow-up. While it's not as good as the first film, it still does some things that I kind of think is kind of interesting. Like, there's this one part in the movie where Gary Oldman, the villain of the film on the human side, this society is based off of having your memories be put on electronic devices. Nothing's really physical in this world. And so when the power goes back on in the human colony, and he finally gets to see his family pictures after the power out, he breaks down crying. Like, that's something that I think is very commendable. I think Gary Oldman's character in this movie is overall one of my favorite characters of the franchise. It gives a little bit more context and a little bit more commentary on how society is going more digital, and that, if we start putting all of our memories on digital, it may just end up one day that we won't be able to see those memories again. That's something that's very interesting in this film. And while that doesn't really take the full focus, it's kind of a nice little side commentary that I think is very important to really kind of talk about. While I do think that the idea of the coexisting sort of thing works, it's not as strong as a story because there's a couple errors I find in the storytelling. And this is the first film that's directed by Matt Reeves, who, by the way, is making the next Batman film a noir film, which is kind of interesting to say. But I think Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is a solid follow-up. While it's not the best one, it's not a great film to follow up with, it's a pretty solid one to follow it up. And as I mentioned before with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the CGI in this series gets so much better the next time it comes. And I feel that the CGI with this one really is something to marvel at. I mean, granted, it's nothing like the original Planet of the Apes where it has prosthetic makeup and whatnot, but when it comes down to it, sometimes movies need to adapt to a new environment, and by making it be a little bit more CG, you can make it a little bit more realistic. And with the type of motion capture that they do in this film, it really brings out the ape in the actors, and it's very marvelous to see. But as a film as a whole, again, it's a solid follow-up. Andy Serkis does a great job again. There's even a scene in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes where he goes back to his original family home from Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and this is kind of where we kind of see where James Franco's character goes. It's not really talked about in the film, but I do feel that James Franco's character is killed off due to the simian flu that took place between the Rise and Dawn. But it's just kind of, I don't know. But there is a nice scene where he goes back to his house and he checks his camcorder and he watches these old home videos of his, and that's something that brings him a little bit more solace as well. I kind of find that that's a really neat parallel between Caesar and Gary Oldman's character, is that they both relied on digital technology to be able to relive their memories of their past, to really cherish the things that made them, human people before the simian flu outbreak. It's such an interesting take to go with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. But, well, that's not really the main focus, as I said before. So, what do I give Dawn of the Planet of the Apes? Well, I'm going to give Dawn of the Planet of the Apes a solid B+. Again, it's really good. It's almost as good as the first reboot movie, but I do think that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is a little bit weaker, just a tiny bit weaker. There's a couple little editing errors here and there. There's a lot of storytelling inconsistencies, but overall, I do think it's a fun film to watch. And yeah, that's all I have. So thank you guys so much for watching my double feature review: Rise of the Planet of the Apes and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And tomorrow, I'm going to be reviewing War for the Planet of the Apes, and hopefully, it is a very great ending to go off on. I think this franchise as a whole, it's had its ups and downs with the quality of the films that they've had, but I think also that the Planet of the Apes films have resurged in a way. And, as I said before, a franchise that can manage to make a movie every 3 or 4 years is something that is very, kind of relieving to me. It's kind of refreshing in a way, because we've gotten used to a film blockbuster environment where they come up with maybe 3 films a year every year, instead of, taking time between movies and making a solid film between those 3 years. And I think that's a rarity nowadays, and I truly appreciate the Planet of the Apes films for doing just that, being refreshing. And so, thank you guys so much for watching again, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.